right, welcome to yet another insightful discussion here at Multichain Day. I've got my panel here with me. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. I'm Seb. I'm GP at Interop Ventures. We're an early stage fund investing in modular infra. And so it is fitting that I am moderating the modular infra panel. I'm also the host of the Epicenter podcast and the Interop podcast, if you want to check those out. To my right.
Hello, my name is Jin. I'm one of the co-founders at Saga. We're a layer one that automatically and permissionlessly launches layer ones for developers who want additional block space. And I guess we'll talk more about us going forward.
Okay, hi. I'm Yuri, CPO at Neon. Neon EVM is EVM compatibility layer on Solana. So we add, let's say, module to Solana, which extends Solana capability in execution of EVM applications. For instance, you'd like to launch EVM applications on Solana, you can do it with network extension for Solana Neon, and you can benefit from full parallel execution of EVM applications based on Solana. And we launched more than 1 year ago, and still just we're growing and growing. So this is Neon.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey folks, I'm Chandler. I do all the BDM partnerships work over at the Avail team. Avail, very famously, is right now a alt-DA solution, very similar to what you'd expect from an alt-DA solution, live on mainnet. Keen to kind of dive into the discussion today.
Hello everyone, my name is Yair Klepper. I'm a contributor in Lava Network. Basically Lava, it's the data access layer for any Web3 data. It's starting from RPC, APIs, and very soon going to indexing, subgraph, oracles, and any actually data primitive.
Thank you. So, I'm actually quite nostalgic of the old days of crypto where, there was one chain, one monolithic chain to rule them all. And developing applications was a snap. You just deploy your smart contract and you can, build money Legos on the same execution environment and the same state, and everything just worked and it was so easy. Now everything seems so complex, right? With all this modular infra. So, maybe just starting by, why are we here? Like, how did we get here? And why is modular infrastructure so important for scaling crypto? Prove me wrong with my monolithic nostalgia.
Do we go in order or? Okay. Well, I mean,
it's fine to also have a conversation, so we don't have to go down the line.
I mean, so my view of this has been a little bit different. I started in the blockchain space with Cosmos, which is just an app chain specific infrastructure. And the world of blockchains as a concept in my head has always been separate. It wasn't like a monolithic chain ever. And so I think modular is a new sexy term that kind of came out, but this concept of horizontal application chains has existed for a very long time. And so from my perspective, the ethos of this is not any different than when we started back in 2017, 2018. And so in my mind, it's just a new word for the same thing, which is better horizontal scalability. And that's
I was talking about 2013, but yeah.
Well, I mean, Ethereum didn't really,
I remember 3.5 years ago when I first entered Web3, it was all about, everyone told me, this is the Ethereum killer, and there's going to be a consolidation of chains. In fact, everyone wants to come up with his own chain, right? Everyone wants to create his own sovereignty, to decide about the gas prices, and to really build easily. So I think modular can only exist if, first, it makes the developer life much more easier, and second, simplify the UX for the end users. So you're talking about building easier. I'm speaking a bit bringing more use cases to end user using the modular thesis.
Yeah, just to add to this, modularity allows for developers to choose best module or best technical solution to fit end user needs, exactly. So you can choose, if you have a good variety of modules, you can choose what is better for you and for users, instead of just sticking to only one blockchain that you have.
Yeah, I think if you know, from 2013 days, like if you want to talk back then, everyone kind of like, you know, was really, really like passionate about their particular chain. And then you had a bunch of developers that figured out, oh, we kind of don't like these like tiny features. So we'll change it and make it a whole new system and a whole new chain. And that happened for like the entire ICO generation. And then we figured out, okay, well, we can kind of make them talk together a little bit. And what was quite cool is like, you know, we saw quite a, like a Cambrian explosion of like really cool use cases once these chains started talking to each other. And at that point, we were like, all right, well, like launching a chain is really expensive. What's like the minimum viable like set of features that we needed to have to like launch chains? And there were different paradigms. Cosmos had its own ecosystem. There's the Ethereum L2 side now. Like there's hundreds of different layer 2 type solutions coming out. And so like the modularity side of it was really just like a regression back to making launching chains a lot easier from this like experimentation that I thought like a bunch of developers tried out. And like it really got kind of spurred on between the like concept of once you could have chains talk together in like a really nice seamless way, you could go much further in terms of like what value you could derive on your specific sovereign chain.
Yeah, that's great. And then, of course, I was being a little snarky at the beginning, and I feel like, you know, it's obvious that, you know, chains were meant, I mean, blockchains were meant to scale and modularize in the same way that Web2 infrastructure did, specifically in the late 2000s and early 2010s as mobile applications started to, I mean, mobile use started really to explode, and we needed better, more scalable web services. And but, you know, in the case of crypto, there's some unique challenges there, and I'd like you guys to maybe discuss, you know, how what those challenges are, and you know, how are each of your projects addressing them, you know, from an infrastructure perspective. But you know, if you can also maybe ponder a little bit about like the unique challenges that it creates as from a kind of ecosystem perspective, like taking a step back.
You know, when we started in the industry, we did some MEV bots more than 3 years ago. It was the NFT summer. And we tried to build some super cool NFT marketplaces. And we bumped into this problem of infrastructure, right? Because at the end of the day, if you want to get access to the data, if you want to read, write transaction, mint an NFT, you need the access to the blockchain itself. And we find out that we need to run nodes in each and every dedicated chain. But in a world with, maybe in a world with a handful of chain, that somehow makes sense. But when it scales, when you got hundreds and thousands of chains, when you want to build millions of different apps using the blockchain technology, it just doesn't make sense, right? Think about today you go and you type www. You don't really know where the website is being hosted, right? You don't know if it's a GCP, AWS. Somebody here knows what's TCP IP, or you know, those concepts doesn't make sense. So why in blockchain we need to implement our own version of cloud at home? And that's, I think, what was one of our understanding, that if the industry wants to scale, there needs to be an access layer that gives developers a single line of code accessing to all Web3. Give them whatever they need when the traffic, when the volume is high, load balancer, disaster recovery, all of that, but in a single way that doesn't violate the Web3 values. And I think that's what really were interesting for us to build in Lava. You think about 3 different execution layer, settlement, and data availability and consensus. So we came with a hypothesis that there is a 4th layer, and that's called the data access layer.
I think in terms of challenges that comes from modularity, a lot of people tend to think that modularity is something that the end user really cares about, which ultimately, I think we talked about this like in previous conversation. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, right? And so you need to separate out like who the target audience you're talking about, because in Web3 today, the user, quote unquote, is like right now conflated between infrastructure people and application people. And really the needs of the two folks are completely and very different. So when someone says, hey, modularity is great because you can pick out components, this is something that's really helpful for the infrastructure engineer. So if you look at how Web 2 has evolved, all the components that make like databases faster and things like that in Web 2, AWS is really interested about because it helps them. But the end user really doesn't care at the end of the day whether or not what components kind of Amazon uses and picks. They just care that the experience is easy and it's easy for them to use. And so I think ultimately we need to differentiate that out and start dealing with kind of modularity in a way where we segment those two out, because kind of conflating those two tends to confuse the end users because it makes it sound like the end users should care about all these components, where really modularity kind of adds more complexity to them. And it's the job of the infrastructure developers to make sure that this user experience is as easy as possible, even though the components are modular, right? And so I generally like to think of modularity as like a benefit, AKA there's better performance, but there's a downside of usability that comes with it. And it's the job of infrastructure provider to hide that away for the users ultimately.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that concept. It's actually not for the end user at the end of the day. It's for the developer. And like, if you give a developer a set of like tools, they will 100% play with those tools to the maximum extent that they have. So like, just let's take data availability as an example. You give a developer an ability to like post unstructured data, and you tell them there's no real restrictions, you can use it the way you want to use it, figure out like what's the best use case. I can guarantee you within 3 months, they're going to come back to you with like a use case that like you haven't even thought about that your protocol could use. And that for me is what like modularity is really for. It's like the tinkerers. Like if you're into cars, folks like that tinker with their cars and try like eke out the best performance out the engine. It's the same concept. And at the end of the day, that's not really what like everyday people drive, but like, quite pertinently, the best car tinkerers in the world are going to be here this weekend, and the tech that they build out will eventually get into your little like city sedan that everyone drives. So I don't think it's necessarily going to happen right now, but like using that metaphor, like the developers that are building like honestly wacky stuff that comes through my desk every day is what I'm excited about, that consumers will use in like 6 months time once like a really cool product market fit concept comes into play.
Yeah, I mostly agree with modularity is more for developers, not for the end users. And on the one hand, for developers, it brings more flexibility to choose right module, right thing to fit to users' need. But on the other hand, the models that you have, the harder to combine all of them and the harder to handle this variety. So maybe it's a matter of it's like, from one hand, it's easier to have standardized models to handle this variety, but on the other hand, when you have standardization, you limit innovation space, and it's very good like trade-off. Should blockchain crypto industry come to some kind of standardization, or it's a balance between some kind of standardization and space for innovation? And
it sounds like you're all saying that we need to abstract away the complexity, right? And I'm reminded that every time you use your Apple Pay or credit card at a merchant, at least in most places. I mean, there are exceptions here. Some countries in Southeast Asia, India, where you might see 5 or 6 different payment terminals on a shop counter. In most places, you have one payment terminal, one card, and that payment will find its way from your credit card issuer to your bank, no matter where you are in the world, because that complexity is abstracted away. How important is, in this world where things are modularizing and becoming more complex at the infrastructure layer, what abstraction solutions do we need to put in place to make it easier for users?
Well, it depends on how you segment what we're talking about as well. And I want to also differentiate. There's actually, we talked about 2, which is end users and developers, but there's actually 3 that we need to think about. There is the end users who are using the developer. So first is the end users, there's the application developers, and then there's the infrastructure developers, right? So in a traditional setting, I would divide that out into Amazon is infrastructure developer, the developer for an app developer is the website developer, and then the end user is the end user of that website, right? And abstraction, in my the way that I've seen happens in all three one of these layers in between as well. And so the things that the infrastructure developers care about, we should abstract a lot of complexity away from the developer as well, because I actually kind of disagree that developers want all the nuts and bolts, in my opinion. What we found, at least talking to developers, is like they don't care. They just want like something that works, and they're really interested in the path of least resistance and how do we get to the point that they want to ultimately. And how do you get there is not really much of a concern in their eyes. And so there needs to be like a nice little abstraction layer between the infrastructure developer and the developers, and also from the developer, obviously, to the end users. But all these pieces kind of run into the same UX issues, because a lot of the decisions that the infrastructure layer pose onto the developer gets exposed to the end developers in adverse ways. And so there's like a waterfall effect, in my opinion, throughout this whole process. And it's just like everyone needs to make sure to set these boundaries correctly so that people can make the most flexible and best application possible ultimately for end developers.
Yeah. Depending on where on that timeline that you're talking about, some developers do care about
that's right.
that
But
concept.
Usually those are like the infrastructure developers. And so we just have to be careful, because a lot of people here are infrastructure developers, right? And it's like, if you want mass adoption, it's like the people you want to attract are the app developers. And it's like, we have to be careful about this, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think your question naturally tends towards the actual end user and how that end user will use your products. And abstraction is kind of a no-brainer. Like we always all of us here pretty much don't mind using the Web3 tools and have kind of gone through that pain, but not many other people will. And that's kind of always been the biggest concept of mass adoption not coming on. It's just too hard to understand these aspects. But to reference your actual point around payment terminals and how do you actually pay, that's the economic use case that everyone knows that they're going to do. People demand coffee. They don't really care about how they pay for the coffee, as long as they get their coffee. That's we're all thinking on how do we get scalability to 10 million people, but the dude just wants his coffee. And there's a big mismatch between there. And so where I think that the idea of modularity comes in is at one point in time, we're going to be figuring out those use cases, and Ethereum couldn't get there, Bitcoin couldn't get there. And we've done hundreds and hundreds and now at this point, thousands of experiments on how do we build this Web3 infrastructure that can then enable somebody to buy their coffee.
Yeah, I second that, and I love your example, Seb, with the credit card. I always give this example. If you come to receive an airdrop and suddenly you have a fail, you're a bit pissed off, right? What about claiming, minting NFT? How about opening a wallet and see that you cannot access the balance, right? All of these problems are existing today because it's very, very hard for developers at the end of the day to use the existing products, to run nodes, to use the centralized providers, and to get access, read-write the data. And also, I second your example with Amazon. If you think about simplifying the way that the end user going to consume the data, he doesn't need to know. Developers don't care, right? I've seen that at the beginning when we talked about decentralized RPC or something like that. They don't care about the decentralization as they care about it as a method, but they want to get the data now. So they care about reliability, scalability of the data, and availability. And if we want to see more usage and more, killer apps that leveraging the infrastructure, we need to make sure that the modular pieces are break down to maintain those values.
Just to add to pain points mentioned, when you're a developer and you'd like to develop payment application on something like this, you have to deal with running infrastructure. This is the true. The second, it's when you have to deal even not at the high abstraction level, at low abstraction level, you have to deal with, if you have to deal with different blockchains, you have to understand even data structures and how it differs from chain to chain. For instance, in Ethereum, you have 18 digits per number. In Solana world, you have 9 digits per number. And even at this level, we don't still have any abstractions or good abstractions that can match this difference in numbers. And you have to, and this, as a developers, you have this pain point, and you have to manage it. And modularity can just align even this data, basic data layer. And for instance, bring in Neon, we can at least be sure that developers can operate with the same. So we convert these 9-digit numbers to 80 digits, and we can align, provide an abstraction layer, and align this at least data layer. So, and yeah, it's a matter of other modules to align maybe more higher level of abstractions. But still, we're at the level when even low data layer it's not aligned yet.
On top of that, what Yuri said, we hear because we believe in multi-chain, right? It's the multi-chain day. And I didn't see like a single chain app that is a killer app. Obviously, you will go within different chains. You go to multi-chain. And this is where the modularity concept has to bring usability, has to bring the key differentiation for the different dApps to implement those components and make it easier.
So what's the next big innovation in modular? Like, we've spent, I feel like, the last cycle breaking up every single component of a monolithic chain into like the most atomic, unit. And, the apps are lacking. I think we agree, right? Like there's an abundance of modular infrastructure and a lack of applications using this infra, block space, etc. Where do we go from here?
And this comes back to what I was talking about earlier. Modularity actually, without dealing with the usability aspect of it, makes everything harder, because there's different components as you go to different chains ultimately. And the next cycle of this is going to be the reintegration of all of these modular parts. So it seems backwards. Like, why did you modularize if you're going to reintegrate back together? But if you look at almost every single technical innovation in the last 50 years, this is the cycle that it follows generally, which is technology companies break apart these technology into smaller chunks. They make each of these chunks more efficient and better. And then there's somebody who comes back and it reintegrates all that back together into a singular experience. And so
that aggregation theory, is that?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I don't know if there's but it's like, if you look at I keep bringing up Amazon, but any kind of server architecture, in the beginning, everything was a singular monolithic data center.
Lamp stack.
Yeah, back in the day. Then everything kind of exploded out into smaller servers, right? And then Amazon comes back and is like, they're rebuilding mainframes, but in a modular fashion, right? And so I think the next big innovation is somebody coming in and integrating all these pieces back together for the experience for the app developers to make app development easier. Because the trajectory so far has been making development harder and harder for app developers, which is why there isn't a lot of new app developers coming into place utilizing all these new technologies. And so that's one of the focuses of Saga. We like to describe us essentially as an integration layer for a lot of people who are trying to build multi-chain applications. And so that's top of our mind, essentially. Liquidity, in terms of block production, all of that, we're trying to integrate it into a singular package such that developers, that abstraction layer that I talked about earlier, we're trying to make everything as easy as possible for the app developer such that they can give the best experience to the end users. And so we kind of play in that space ultimately. But I think that's going to be the big next innovation that brings in new developers and new users ultimately into the system.
Cool.
You think that the sentiment today in the market is all-time low, right? The modular sentiment. This can be disrupted by the usability, right? More usage, more at the end of the day, easy tools to bring the end users. I know, and we in Lava are in contact with a lot of new rollups that coming up and gonna launch in Q4. So I think at the beginning of the year, Q1 was a power injection for the whole industry to bring the modular thesis to its next level. And we just made a recap in the last weekend to see the usage, and we've realized that we're serving 2.3 million unique users on Web3, and this kind of number tells you that probably 90% of them never heard about Lava, but we're trying to frame that as the backbone to any Web3 data access. So if we are able to simplify that and bring a better performance to the end user, that's gonna, push the next killer apps and adoption that we all want to see.
I was going to mention something very similar to what you mentioned around breaking everything apart, putting it back together. So I'll come up with something slightly different, but that was my first one. And that's actually just like the turbocharging of absolutely every component that you can put together and like hyper optimizing it to a specific use case. Like we're seeing a bunch of these very high performance chains that are coming out now that are touting like 10,000 transactions per second. Like that's actually kind of crazy to think about one chain being able to do that. And like that never happened. That would have never happened if we all just sat down like one monolithic route. Somebody had to go figure something out and like try 100 different ways of approaching that. And I think if those chains can launch successfully, obviously execute their like go to markets and kind of get a decent amount of developer and like application interest, what you could do with that amount of block space, like I think can genuinely take over the internet. Sure, there'll be a couple like breaking changes at that point, but like 10,000 transactions per second sounds pretty cool right now.
It's a good point to mention transactions per second and current capability to execute it. For instance, Visa. Visa can handle 65,000 transactions per second, and it's just one of the example of a real Web2 demand, which should be covered in future, nearest or far future by blockchain. And nowadays, no one blockchain, you mentioned 10K TPS as a, like, let's say, paramount of blockchains. But even 10K, it's not enough for processing just only Visa demand. But it's more and more demand. And how can I anticipate future demand or the most demand from adoption side, from an end user's case side? It's, let's say, two things. First, it's scaling blockchains vertically, like increasing this 10K up to 15K, like Solana pretend to process 1 million K with FireDancer. And second, it's horizontal scaling or launching more and more rollups. And it's like a battle should be general rollups or application-specific rollups, but in all cases, anticipate we will see more and more rollups running on, even on Solana. Despite of processing thousands of transactions, still it will be more demand than technical possibilities of this single monolithic blockchain. So it's a matter of bringing more and more modular solutions and rollups, and especially, I believe more in most technological advanced ZK rollups for Solana, which is becoming growing and growing since the beginning of this year. And we are researching in this field too, and we believe this is what will be the future like.
Well, when the chain that sold the world on monolithic or really went far on that thesis ends up becoming modular, I think that says something about where infrastructure sort of naturally goes. Thank you so much for everybody here on the panel. And yeah, thanks to you for sticking around. Cheers.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.